The lantern flame should have been tearing sideways. It didn't move. Cassie Rowan stood beneath a sandstone shelf with Winter screaming across the open draw, and the little yellow flame in her hand stayed straight as a nail. 10 feet away, snow was flying sideways hard enough to erase wagon tracks before they finished forming. But under the stone, the air was still. Not calmer. Still. Cassie lowered the lantern slowly and held her breath, as if breathing too loudly might break whatever she had found. The wind rushed over the ridge above her. It tore through sagebrush. It rattled dead grass against the frozen creek bed. Then it passed right over the hollow beneath the shelf and left that narrow pocket untouched. For 3 nights, she had been sleeping in ditches. For 3 mornings, she had woken with frost in her hair. So when the flame stayed upright in that impossible quiet, Cassie understood something no one had bothered to teach her. A wall did not have to be built by a man to keep a person alive. Sometimes the earth had already made one. 2 weeks earlier, her stepfather, Alden Pike, had decided she was finished being his problem. He didn't throw plates. He didn't curse. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply stood in the doorway of the washroom while Cassie wrung out shirts in water so cold her fingers had gone red. "You're 19, he said. Cassie kept her hands in the tub. A grown woman earns her own roof. Her mother sat beside the stove mending a sleeve. The needle moved in and out, in and out. She never looked up. By dawn, Cassie's blanket roll, spare dress, tin cup, and one cracked lantern were waiting beside the pump. The door was locked from the inside. Smoke rose from the chimney as if the house had never known her. Cassie stood there long enough for the cold to reach through her shoes. Then she picked up the bundle and walked north, because north was where the land got mean and empty. Mean land did not ask questions. Empty land did not tell a girl she was unwanted. The road ended by the second day. The fences ended after that. The prairie rose into broken ridges and dry ravines where the wind moved like a living animal. Food went first, then warmth. Then the idea that pride mattered. By the 4th evening, Cassie was no longer searching for a home. She was searching for a place where the wind could not find her. That was when she saw the shelf. It leaned out from the ridge like the brow of a giant sleeping in the earth. Sandstone above, hard-packed dirt below. A shallow hollow set back into the rock, not deep enough to be a cave, but deep enough to cast a permanent shadow across the ground. The snow had drifted around it instead of inside it. Loose grass lay there dry. A dead cottonwood branch rested near the back wall, untouched by frost. Cassie stepped in with her lantern. The flame steadied. She stepped back out. The flame snapped sideways. She stepped in again. Still, that was the whole miracle. Not magic, not luck. Just wind meeting stone and choosing the easier path over the top. Then Cassie noticed the wreckage at the bottom of the draw. At first it looked like a dark heap half buried in weeds. She climbed down and found the remains of an old freight wagon, probably abandoned after a team had spooked years before. The wheels were gone. The tongue was split. The iron brackets had rusted into reddish scales, but the wagon box was still there. Heavy, cracked, and stubbornly square. Most people would have called it useless. Cassie looked back at the quiet hollow under the sandstone shelf. Then she looked at the wagon box again. By sunrise, she was tying rope around the front beam. Moving it took all day. The box scraped forward inches at a time. Frozen dirt caught under the planks. Old boards groaned. More than once Cassie fell to her knees and stayed there shaking, with her palms burning through the rope. She could have left it. No one would have blamed her. No one would have known. But she had spent her whole life being treated like something that could be set outside. She was not going to leave the only useful thing she had found out in the weather. Near dusk, A rider appeared on the ridge. His name was Jonah Bell, a trapper with a bad knee and a habit of pretending not to care about anyone. He stopped his mule and stared down into the draw. "Girl," he called, "are you dragging a dead wagon uphill?" Cassie wiped blood from one palm onto her skirt. "Yes." Jonah looked at the wagon box, then at the sandstone shelf, then back at Cassie. "Why?" "Because the wind can't get under there." He waited for the rest of the answer. There wasn't one. Jonah sighed like helping her was an insult the world had personally delivered to him. Then he climbed down, wrapped the rope around his saddle horn, and told the mule to lean. Together they dragged the wagon box into the hollow. The moment it slid beneath the shelf, the shape of the place changed. The rock blocked the back and top. The wagon box closed the front. The dirt floor stayed dry. The hollow stopped feeling like a shadow, and started feeling like a room that had forgotten its last wall. Cassie saw it before Jonah did. She wedged branches into the open gaps. She pressed mud between the boards. She packed dry grass into seams and covered it with strips of old canvas pulled from the wreck. She stacked flat stones along the base so the wind could not crawl under. Then she built a small fire near the back wall, where smoke could slide out along the roofline. Jonah watched for a while with his arms crossed. "You'll smoke yourself blind. Not if the draft pulls outward. You'll freeze anyway. Not as fast." That made him quiet. By the next afternoon, people in town were laughing. A girl living in a wagon under a rock, a charity case building a rat hole, a fool sealing herself into firewood and mud. Cassie heard the jokes when she walked in for nails, salt, and a sack of cornmeal she paid for with 2 days of washing at the boarding house. She did not answer them. She had no energy to spend proving a shelter before the weather did, so she kept working. Every night, the little room changed. The cracks grew smaller. The air moved less. The fire burned steadier. The sandstone took warmth slowly, and gave it back even slower. After sunset, when the outside air dropped so sharply it hurt to breathe, the wall behind Cassie remained cool, but not cruel. The wagon boards held the heat near her knees. The packed grass stopped the thin knives of wind that had cut through every blanket she owned. Jonah returned 3 evenings later with coffee, dried beans, and the expression of a man preparing to be unimpressed. He stepped inside. Then he stopped. Outside, the ridge wind was scraping grit across the frozen ground. Inside, the fire made a low orange glow against the stone. Cassie was sitting on an overturned crate, mending a tear in her glove. Jonah lifted his hat. The air did not snatch it from his hand. He looked at the entrance. He looked at the wall. He touched the sandstone with 2 fingers, then touched the inside of the wagon box. "Well," he said. Cassie kept sewing. "Well, what?" Jonah frowned, because he disliked being forced into honesty. "It's holding." Cassie allowed herself one small smile. "It's holding heat." "Rock does that?" "Slowly." "And the wagon?" "Keeps the warm air from leaving." "And the grass?" "Stops the little winds." Jonah sat down without asking. For a long time he said nothing. Then very quietly he laughed. Old Town is laughing at a house they don't understand. Cassie looked toward the black mouth of the entrance, where snow had started to move across the draw again. "It isn't a house," she said. "Then what is it?" She listened to the wind vanish above the stone. "A place the storm forgets to enter." The warning came 6 days later. A telegraph man rode in from the rail station with his horse lathered and his coat white to the shoulders. He went straight to the mercantile, where farmers, haulers, and ranch hands crowded close enough to hear each other breathing. Cassie stood near the flour barrels with a coil of wire in her hands. The man unfolded a paper. Dakota stations are reporting pressure falling hard, he said. Wind already turned north, snow behind it. Someone near the counter muttered, "How much?" The telegraph man did not answer right away. That was the answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone flat. "They are calling it the worst line storm in 20 years. The room changed. Jokes disappeared. Men who had laughed at Cassie's wagon shelter started thinking about barn roofs, cattle draws, haystacks, thin cabin walls, and children sleeping beside windows that rattled in ordinary wind. Jonah found Cassie outside the store. "You coming into town?" "No." "You heard what he said." "I heard." He looked toward the northern sky. A dark bank of cloud was forming there, low and solid, as if the horizon had been boarded shut. "That little rock hole won't be enough." Cassie pulled the wire tighter around her bundle of supplies. "It has been enough every night the wind tried it. This won't be wind." She looked up at him. "Then it's time to find out what it is." The storm arrived after midnight. It did not begin with soft snow. It struck. The first gust hit the ridge so hard Cassie woke, with her hand already around the lantern. The world outside had become a white animal throwing itself at the earth. Snow blasted across the draw in sheets. The cottonwoods bent until their branches clawed the ground. Somewhere far off, something made of wood cracked under pressure. Cassie waited for the wagon box to shake. It didn't. The fire had burned down to a red bed of coals. Normally, that should have meant panic. Cold should have poured into the room. Breath should have turned sharp and white. Instead, the air remained steady enough that Cassie could sit up without flinching. She touched the sandstone. Cool, not frozen. She touched the board beside the fire, warm along the grain. The whole strange room was doing exactly what she had hoped, and more than she had dared believe. The rock took the violence of the wind and sent it overhead. The wagon held the air. The mud stopped the seams. The stored warmth leaked back slowly into the hollow. Cassie sat beside the coals, wrapped her blanket around her shoulders, and listened to winter lose track of her. By the second day, the valley had vanished. There was no road, no fence line, no creek edge, only white motion, and the dark underside of the sandstone shelf. Cassie had to clear the entrance twice so drifting snow would not seal her in. Each time she opened the canvas flap, the world roared at her. Each time she dropped it, the room fell quiet again. Then came the knocking. At first, she thought a branch had blown against stone. 3 weak strikes. Then a voice. Cassie grabbed the lantern and pulled the flap aside. A man fell forward into the hollow, half carrying and half dragging himself. Jonah. His beard was locked with ice. One glove was missing. His bad knee had given out so completely he could barely stand. Cassie pulled him inside with both hands and shoved the entrance closed. For several minutes, Jonah could only breathe. The storm had left him blue around the mouth. Cassie wrapped his hands in cloth and set a cup of hot water against his fingers until he could hold it. Then Jonah looked around. His eyes moved slowly from the fire to the sealed boards, to the sandstone wall shining faintly with heat. "No," he whispered. Cassie was kneeling by the coals. "No what?" He swallowed. "No cabin in town is this quiet?" The storm worsened that afternoon. Wind drove snow under doors, through roof gaps, through walls people had trusted for years. A cattle shed collapsed under a drift. A barn lost half its shingles. The schoolhouse stove went out twice, because the chimney backdrafted so hard it smoked the room black. By evening, more people found the hollow. Mrs. Abernathy came first with a child wrapped inside her coat. Then the 2 Mercado brothers, one limping from frostbite, then a farmer and his wife whose roof beam had split over their bed. Then 3 children from the boarding house, led by the cook, who had tied them together with clothesline, so she would not lose one in the whiteout. Every person stopped just inside the entrance. It was not warm like summer. It was not comfortable in any grand way. It smelled of smoke, damp wool, beans, and packed earth. People sat shoulder to shoulder. Boots dripped. Children cried, then grew quiet. But the wind was gone. That was what silenced them. Outside, winter beat at the valley, like it hated every living thing in it. Inside, a lantern flame stood upright on a crate. Mrs. Abernathy stared at that flame so long, Cassie thought she might start praying to it. Jonah leaned against the wall, wrapped in Cassie's blanket, and said to no one in particular, "We built square houses where the wind could hit all 4 sides." No one laughed. Cassie fed the fire 1 stick at a time. Too much flame would smoke them, too little would let the room cool. She watched the stone. She watched the breath in the air. She learned the shelter the way other people learned scripture. When too many bodies crowded in, the room grew warmer. When the flap opened too long, cold spilled low along the floor. When children slept near the back wall, they stayed warmest. Because the sandstone gave back heat through the night. The shelter was not saving them because it was strong. It was saving them because it asked the storm to waste its strength somewhere else. On the 5th day, the food ran thin. On the 6th, a man tried to go for supplies and made it only 30 yards before the wind knocked him to his knees. On the 7th, the storm grew so loud that even beneath the shelf, everyone could hear the valley breaking. Roof beams cracked in the distance. Trees split. Once, a sound rolled through the snow like a gunshot, and every adult in the wagon went still. The children slept anyway. That was when the room became more than shelter. It became proof. The people who had laughed at Cassie now watched her decide where to hang blankets, when to open the flap, where to place the fire, how to bank coals against stone, how to keep smoke moving out instead of down. They watched her read the hidden rules of the place, with the calm of someone who had been listening before anyone else knew there was a lesson. Late that night, Mrs. Abernathy touched the sandstone wall beside her. "My husband spent 3 years adding boards to our house," she said softly. Still the wind came through. Jonah looked at Cassie. This girl used half a wagon and mud. Cassie shook her head. "No," she said. "I used the rock first." That settled over the room, because she was right. The wagon mattered. The mud mattered. The fire mattered. But the real wall was the one no one had built. The real roof was the ridge. The real strength was knowing which part of the world was already on your side. The blizzard lasted 10 days. When the final wind died, silence did not feel peaceful at first. It felt suspicious. No one moved until morning light turned the canvas flap pale gray. Cassie pushed it open with both hands and stepped outside. The valley had changed shape. Hay wagons had disappeared under white hills. One barn roof lay folded like paper. Chimneys poked from drifts where cabins were nearly buried to the windows. Smoke rose from some houses. From others, people crawled out slowly, stunned and blinking, as if the world had been rebuilt while they slept. The hollow under the sandstone was nearly untouched. Snow had piled in a crescent beyond the entrance, but the inside stayed dry. The lantern still stood on its crate. The coals still held red in the ash. Behind Cassie, 20. 3 people were alive because a girl with nowhere to go had noticed where the wind stopped. Spring came late that year. When the snow melted, people began walking out to the ridge for reasons they pretended were practical. They measured the shelf. They touched the stone. They studied the wagon box, Men who had mocked the shelter now asked Cassie whether a root cellar should face east or south. Women brought extra canvas. Jonah brought a door hinge and never explained where he got it. By summer, 3 families had built storm rooms into banked earth. The schoolhouse stacked its north wall with stone. The mercantile owner paid Cassie to help design a storage room that stayed cool even in July, and safe when the wind rose in November. Alden Pike came once. He stood outside the hollow with his hat in his hands, looking at the wagon box as if it had accused him of something. Cassie watched him from the entrance. He said, "Your mother heard what happened." Cassie waited. She wondered if you might come by. The old part of her, the part that had stood beside the pump with frost in her shoes, almost answered too quickly. Instead, she looked past him to the ridge, to the sky, to the place where the wind climbed over stone and lost its teeth. "No," she said. Alden blinked. Cassie turned back inside and set another flat stone into the wall. Years later, people would tell they would make it sound as if Cassie survived because she was lucky enough to find a cave. They would say the wagon saved everyone. They would say the storm spared one corner of the valley for no reason.
But the people who had sat shoulder to shoulder in that dim little room knew the truth. It was not luck, it was not a cave, and it was not a miracle. A cast-off girl looked at a ridge everyone else had passed for years and saw a shape in the weather. She saw that stone could break wind, that earth could store heat, that waste could become a... And that survival did not always belong to the people with the biggest houses. Sometimes it belongs to the person who notices where the storm gives up.